Rain pounded against the corrugated roof, each drop echoing like a drum of warning. Inside the dark, suffocating shed, 10-year-old Ethan trembled, his small body pressed against the cold, splintered wooden wall. The dim light seeping through the cracks painted jagged shadows across his tear-streaked face. His hands were scraped raw from desperate attempts to claw at the padlock, but it wouldn't budge. No matter how hard he tried, the heavy metal refused to give in. Outside, the wind howled like a warning, shaking the rusted hinges and rattling the fragile structure that had become his prison. Ethan's heart raced, each beat louder than the last, echoing in the empty shed as if mocking his helplessness. He didn't understand why this was happening. One moment he was playing in the yard, laughing with his little sister, and the next, trapped in darkness, alone, abandoned. A shadow loomed near the doorway, stretching unnaturally long in the flickering lightning. The man who had locked him here, cruel, merciless, and unchecked, paused for a moment, relishing the fear he had cultivated. Ethan's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape, but the walls were closing in, both literally and figuratively. He was trapped, and the storm outside seemed to mirror the storm inside his mind, chaos, fear, and despair. And then, a distant roar shattered the oppressive silence. Engines thundered like a herd of charging beasts, echoing across the fields, bouncing off the nearby barns, vibrating through Ethan's fragile chest. His eyes widened. Could it be? Could help actually be coming? A strange mixture of hope and disbelief flooded him. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone. Somewhere beyond the walls of the shed, someone was coming. Someone who refused to let injustice win. Someone who would not let a child suffer in silence. But would they reach him before it was too late? Ethan had always been a bright, joyful boy, the kind whose laughter could light up a room. He loved climbing trees in the backyard, chasing butterflies, and drawing little superheroes that saved the day in colorful crayon strokes. But behind the cheerful smile, there was a quiet resilience born out of hardship. His mother, a single parent working long shifts, did her best to keep the family afloat, but life had handed them a series of bitter challenges. Bills stacked up like towers, the neighbors whispered their judgments, and each day felt like a tightrope walk over uncertainty. Despite the struggles, Ethan's world had one anchor, his sense of safety, the comforting warmth of his home, and the love of those who cared for him. But that fragile sense of security was ripped away in an instant. A man from the neighborhood, someone who Ethan had never truly trusted, a shadowy figure with a reputation for cruelty, saw vulnerability and decided to exploit it. It started small, a sly comment, an intimidating glance, but escalated quickly. Within days, Ethan was trapped, silenced, and powerless, confined to a dark shed that smelled of damp wood and despair. The neighbors turned a blind eye, wrapped up in their own lives, while the local authorities dismissed his mother's frantic pleas as overreactions. Calls went unanswered, warnings ignored. Each hour that passed strengthened the villain's hold over the boy. Ethan's days became endless loops of fear. He counted the hours by the creaks of the old door, the sounds of rain hitting the roof, the occasional mocking laugh of the man who held him captive. Sleep became a stranger, dreams haunted by shadows, and even the smallest flicker of hope seemed impossible to grasp. At school, Ethan's absence was explained away with excuses he couldn't refute, but every teacher he loved noticed something was wrong. The boy who used to doodle superheroes and speak with bright eyes now cowered at sounds, flinched at movements, and stared blankly into nothing. He tried to tell his mother what was happening, but the shed's walls seemed to swallow his words before they could reach her ears. The injustice weighed heavily on everyone who cared for him. For Ethan, it wasn't just the physical confinement, it was the fear, the feeling that no one could or would save him. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a small spark remained, a desperate hope that someone, anyone, might come. Someone who would see the cruelty for what it was, someone who would act when everyone else had failed. Little did he know, that hope was about to transform into a thunderous, unstoppable force, a force that would not just break locks and chains, but shatter the walls of fear and despair surrounding him. Days blurred into nights inside the shed, each one heavier than the last. Ethan's small body shivered from cold, and his mind churned with fear. The man who had trapped him grew bolder, more brazen, as if sensing that no one was coming to challenge him. Every time the boy pressed his face against the cracks in the wooden walls, trying to see beyond, he caught glimpses of a cruel smirk or the glint of a knife in the dim light. The air was thick with menace, the kind that clings to your skin and seeps into your bones. Outside, the storm intensified, thunder rattling the loose panels of the shed as if warning of impending chaos. Yet inside, the real storm was human, a villain determined to crush every ounce of hope Ethan still clung to. He taunted the boy with whispered threats, each word designed to plant terror in his heart. "No one will come. You're alone. Forever." The repetition was calculated, a psychological assault meant to break the fragile spirit of a child. Even the world beyond the yard seemed to conspire against him. The neighbors who might have noticed, the passerby who could have heard his faint cries, all remained indifferent. The police had dismissed calls as trivial, leaving Ethan trapped under the suffocating weight of disbelief and neglect. As the hours passed, the villain's confidence swelled. He began preparing to move Ethan elsewhere, a plan that would make escape even more impossible. Chains rattled, tools clanged against the walls, and the boy's panic escalated to a deafening crescendo inside his mind. Every noise was a threat, every shadow a predator, and hope flickered like a candle in the wind, fragile, threatened, almost extinguished. Yet, somewhere beyond the storm, engines roared. Distant but growing louder, their thunder promising justice, signaling that the tide was about to turn. Unknown to Ethan, the forces of retribution were closing in. Forces that had seen the injustice, felt the weight of the fear, and refused to let it continue. The shed's walls, the villain's threats, and the oppressive darkness could not contain what was coming. The rising threat was no longer just the man outside, it was the countdown to confrontation, the ticking clock before justice arrived. The distant rumble that Ethan had barely dared to hope for grew louder, closer, until it vibrated through the ground beneath the shed. The storm's wind seemed to bow to the roar of engines, and the shadows cast by lightning danced over an approaching force of steel and leather. One by one, motorcycles emerged from the darkness, headlights cutting through the rain like swords of justice. The Hells Angels had arrived, a brotherhood bound by loyalty, courage, and a fierce sense of right and wrong. Each biker carried an aura of power that demanded attention. Rain-slicked leather jackets clung to their muscular frames, badges gleamed in the fleeting light, and the synchronized growl of their engines was like the heartbeat of a single, unstoppable entity. Their leader, a towering figure with a scar tracing down one cheek, revved his bike and signaled to the others. No words were needed, the plan was written in their unspoken bond. They were here for one reason, to rescue a child who had been abandoned, ignored, and terrorized. As they neared the shed, the villain, confident moments before, froze. He could hear the motorcycles, feel the tension in the air. The sound was deafening, like a tempest incarnate, announcing their presence before they even appeared. The man's bravado faltered, his threats no longer carrying weight. He had underestimated the resolve of those who refused to turn away from injustice. Inside the shed, Ethan's ears pricked up. The vibrations underfoot, the growl of engines, and the distinct click of motorcycle boots on wet ground sent a spark of hope shooting through him. He clutched the wooden wall, trembling, unsure if this was a dream or reality. Then he heard it, a voice cutting through the storm, calm but commanding, "Hold on, kid. We're coming for you." The bikers encircled the shed, engines idling like wild beasts poised to strike. Rain splattered their visors, glinting off chrome, and yet nothing could diminish the sheer presence of justice that radiated from them. They worked as one, a unit that had faced danger countless times, yet each mission carried the weight of protecting those who could not protect themselves. Their motorcycles were more than machines, they were instruments of liberation, shields of courage, and harbingers of hope. The villain realized, too late, that he was no longer in control. Every move he made was anticipated, every escape route blocked. The Hells Angels were not just here to intimidate, they were here to dismantle fear itself. One biker kicked the shed door, testing the lock, while another prepared tools to break through if necessary. The leader's voice carried through the storm, "This ends tonight." For Ethan, the cacophony of engines, shouts, and rain transformed the shed from a prison into a beacon of salvation. He clung to the promise embedded in every growl of the engines and every determined gaze: he would not remain a victim. The bikers' arrival wasn't just a scene of power, it was the tangible manifestation of hope, loyalty, and unstoppable justice, coming to life in the pouring rain. The villain's confidence shattered like glass under the Hell's Angels' presence. Rain lashed against the shed as if urging the inevitable confrontation. The leader's eyes, cold and piercing, met the man's trembling gaze. "Open it," he demanded, voice steady yet filled with authority. "Now." The man shook, backing away, realizing that no intimidation, no threat, no shadow of cruelty could withstand what was coming. The bikers worked with precision. One struck the padlock with a crowbar, the metal groaning in protest before finally surrendering. Another swung the door open, rain cascading inside, water mixing with dust, mud, and the tension that had built for days. Ethan's eyes widened as the door creaked, and light, freedom, and the promise of safety flooded the cramped shed. He stumbled forward, tears streaming down his face, and the leader extended a hand. "You're safe now, kid," he said, voice unwavering. Every word carried the weight of protection and reassurance. The villain could only watch, powerless, as his control crumbled before him. The bikers didn't just stop at freeing Ethan, they confronted the source of his torment. The man's lies, his threats, and his cruelty were exposed under the unflinching gaze of the bikers and the stormy night around them. "You thought no one would come," the leader said, his tone a mix of fury and clarity. "But justice doesn't wait, and neither do we." Rain-soaked and unafraid, the bikers circled him, ensuring that every move he made was accounted for. There was no escape. The Ingine's growl echoed like judgment, vibrating through the ground, through the man's bones. He tried to speak, to bargain, but every word was swallowed by the overwhelming presence of unyielding justice. The fear that he had instilled in Ethan was now mirrored back tenfold, amplified by the bikers' unbreakable unity and determination. Ethan clung to the leader, feeling a safety he hadn't known in days. "You're a hero," he whispered, voice small but filled with relief. The leader shook his head, a faint smile breaking through the storm of rain and adrenaline. "We all have our role, kid. Today, ours was to make sure you could see tomorrow." Neighbors peered from windows, the storm's roar mingling with the clatter of engines and the unfolding confrontation. Some whispered in awe, others in fear, but all witnessed the truth: the boy was no longer alone, the villain was powerless, and justice had found its way, fierce and uncompromising. Finally, with the man subdued and authorities on their way, the bikers turned their attention back to Ethan. They wrapped him in a warm jacket, lifted him gently onto a motorcycle, and prepared for the journey home. The rain continued to fall, but it now felt like a cleansing, washing away fear, pain, and the shadows that had haunted the boy. The showdown was over. The villain had faced his reckoning, and the child had been returned to safety, enveloped in the protective embrace of those who refused to let evil go unchecked. As engines roared one last time, a cinematic tableau unfolded: Ethan safe, rain shimmering on leather jackets, motorcycles poised like guardians of justice. The storm's fury had not won, the bikers had, delivering a lesson in courage, loyalty, and the unstoppable force of righteous action. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle as Ethan stepped out of the shed, finally free from the darkness that had held him captive. His small hands clutched the warm jacket the bikers had given him, and a timid smile flickered across his face, fragile, but real. The fear that had weighed on him for days seemed to lift with every breath of fresh air, replaced by a sense of safety he hadn't dared to imagine. The Hell's Angels gathered around, their presence still formidable, yet their eyes carried a quiet warmth. No words were needed between them, the bond of brotherhood and purpose was written in every stance, every glance. They had come for one mission: to protect the innocent and punish cruelty. And they had done it. Ethan's gratitude shone brighter than any metal, brighter than the glistening chrome of the motorcycles lined up behind them. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, witnessing a scene that would linger in their memories: a small boy rescued, standing tall despite the ordeal, flanked by men who had risked everything to ensure justice prevailed. The villain, now in the hands of the authorities, could only watch, knowing he had underestimated the power of courage and unity. Ethan turned to the bikers, his voice soft but steady. "Thank you," he whispered. The leader knelt down, looking him in the eye. "Remember, kid, bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about standing strong even when you are scared." Ethan nodded, understanding more in that moment than he ever had before. As the sun began to pierce through the storm clouds, the bikers mounted their motorcycles. Engines roared once more, a symphony of power and resolve, before they disappeared down the muddy road, leaving behind only the echo of their passage and the promise that someone would always fight for justice. Ethan watched them go, knowing that heroes often walk in silence, leaving change and hope in their wake. The boy's smile grew wider as he finally ran into his mother's arms, the world no longer a prison, but a place where courage, hope, and love had triumphed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more powerful, cinematic stories that remind us that courage and justice can always prevail.